Well, I'm at the museum exhibition, which is currently on, which is looking at protest over the centuries. A very nice piece of graphics there. People, power, protest. Of course, that's the sort of the glamorous image of protest, which survives, isn't it? And the history books are full of marches of people in different places, not including Jersey, marching behind a banner. And this exhibition is interesting because it shows, it indicates the diversity of protests that there have been over the years. It doesn't go back into darkest history. Tom Grouchy in the 1769 mini-revolution gets a mention. But of course, some people who more latterly in the 21st century, 20th century, 21st century, have actually been involved in protests. Generally, they're not very successful. That was there about Queen's Valley. And obviously the feeling is very often with these to bring in an outside celebrity like I think that was Mr. Bellamy. He was a well-known environmentalist. You have to bring somebody of stature to add to the Jersey people, as though the Jersey people's voice isn't strong enough to speak for themselves. Now, Senator Sandyman took a petition to the Privy Council on the Valley, which is the traditional method of protest in a constitutional way. And for 1,000 years, the Privy Council registers are stuffed with petitions from the Channel Islands about all sorts of complaints. Of course, Senator Sandyman's petition was unsuccessful. The valley was flooded, Queen's Valley was flooded. And there's talk now of flooding another one if they can find one. And it was a sort of a respectable, had an environmental, the basis was environmental, which attracts a lot of course, nice, steady, respectable, middle-class people in Jersey, as well as working-class people. But there's a sort of a respectability about protest. There's a protest about nuclear, well, it was about nuclear bombs, but it was also about the stuff across the way on the French. I'm actually hidden away right at the back of that queue up there. That's my presence, I think. So whatever year that was, I'm not sure. We had all sorts of things. We used to, little stunts. But of course, it was not the government didn't really get to grips with it, really. They wouldn't defy the British government on that. They didn't want to fall out with France. Women's votes, Caroline Trashy, 1920s. Again, women are proud to say they've had the vote now for 100 years in Jersey, but I must say personally, I'm not very impressed with what they've done with the vote. There are a few women now in the States who are very active and have got more of a social conscience, in my view. But women do have a different approach to political activities. Men have an aggressive approach, which women don't seem to share in the most part. So, hopefully, women will...
Women hate politics unless they're actually engaged in it.
Here's a protester who just happened to be floating by. Come and explain further, Nikolai.
It's quite a nice observation as to the lack of engagement by women generally in the political process. There are some militants, of course,
yes.
But otherwise it's pretty much a male profession.
You might have thought that Trashy and her, somebody who see the petition that's over there signed, a lot of women signed the petition for better rights for women. But why did they die away? Why? Having got that momentum going, why did it fall away?
Well, it's all about organisation and political power.
The tragedy about this particularly, you know, the biggest thing that's happened to the world, if we're to believe them, Extinction Rebellion. This is more ridiculed than regarded with respect, isn't it? The dressing up in red outfits. It's sort of, it's almost demonstrated, it's sort of dismissed by the public as being a peripheral activity. It sort of distracts from the extraordinarily serious problem which is confronting the world. And the fact that there's a 18-year-old Greta, again, people dismiss it because it's a youngster campaigning, and she's so important. Globally, she's had such an influence, and there's this sort of reaction against her. It distracts from what is the complaint, what is the problem. And of course,
the problem is capitalism.
Capitalism is, that's it, capitalism, which of course we've embraced now for a long time.
No, we have fought against it.
When? Jersey context?
I mean, there are struggles against it, even though it's dominated by, of course, its personification of its finance.
I have to mention in the women's context, I was very impressed this very week, yesterday and today, I think yesterday in the States, Corinna of the Reform Party spoke extremely well. She's obviously got her confidence now. She spoke for a long time. Proposition on electoral reform and other things. Now, if there were more women with her capability and ability, that would be very refreshing. And it would have effect. I think it would have effect. I hope she keeps going. I hope she gets support. And I hope more follow her, and I hope she can teach more people that this is the way to go. Personally, of course, I think democracy is dead, but that's another... You see, I don't know, this is an opening. It's a beautiful picture, but it's got all that. You see the flags. You've got to find the flags to show the allegiance to whatever the system is, whatever the government is. It's that sort of, it has to have that allegiance. If anybody doesn't fit into this system...
Note the constable's officer keeping back the riffraff.
Right, yes, he's keeping down in the bottom corner. That's exactly what he's doing, isn't he? So the notables, there's the bailiff in the middle. I don't know, he's pressing the button to open it or whatever he's doing. It's the official, the red cloaks of the authority, the jurats in this case.
We have the Lieutenant Governor there, although he wasn't. He was dying at the time.
Was he?
Yeah. But he was painted in, obviously, for maintain the hierarchy.
Here, this is where we are now. Look, party politics is all of a sudden... It's explaining, the exhibition explains they've been here a long time. Tom Gruchy and his friends, who I've been very much promoting over the past 20 years, and it's good to see that at long last, Tom Gruchy and his supporters, 1769, they overthrew the royal court and all that stuff, totally corrupt. But there was party politics then, there was.
200 years to get credit.
Yeah, exactly. Abraham Lacroix, another dissenter, who wrote volumes of extraordinary stuff. How he did his research, I cannot imagine. But he had followers, but he was ridiculed, of course. Agitator, as Balain called him, agitator. You see, he didn't express the official line. He said Jersey government was nothing more than a common council. And of course, they don't like that. They like to think they are leading the world and punching above their weight and independent.
Small island nation.
Small island nation, that's right. That's the latest turn of phrase. So, anybody who's interested at all in Jersey politics or history ought to come down here and have a look. It gives a global context to what protest is all about, which is welcome. Obviously, one large room, there's only so much you can say. And they've got a little corner here too, which presumably is intended to appeal to younger people. I don't know. It's presented in a sort of a younger person's way. But it also appeals to people who have participated in protests. And I've participated in many protests, marching behind various banners in Jersey. I mean, there are many noticeable absentees here. I can't see any mention of Norman de Brock. Now, you know, if you ever talk about working class struggle, you can't ignore Norman de Brock. But he seems to be ignored here. But that's inevitable. What we need is a proper facility to study Jersey social history, Jersey political history. There needs to be a proper course of...
Well, there's no reference to the parties of protest, particularly Jersey Democratic Movement, post-war, Jersey Democratic Movement of the 60s, Time for Change, which came out of the child abuse protests on the 8th of March 2008.
And it is
talking about the formation of Reform.
I mean, the child abuse inquiry, I mean, apart from the cost, which obviously people worry about, it was an enormous undertaking to investigate child abuse significantly since the occupation. So in other words, liberation was the start of it. Now, something as big as that, but the occupation itself, why didn't that create more interest in politics? You'd have thought being occupied by an army of thugs would have woken people's awareness, but it didn't. A few people like Norman Le Brock.
It did radicalise somewhat. They got 1/3 of the vote, I think.
But it was very short-lived, very temporary.
Yeah. But the revolutionary wave across Europe declined very quickly.
Why?
Civil wars were fought, lost, some won in Eastern Europe.
So we are now in a mess. We are in a terrible mess. And if Greta and if the red lady there, or the red person, is correct, we've got very little time to sort ourselves out. If the virus doesn't kill us all, the rising tide probably will. So it's not a very good outlook, is it? I'm surprised that more people aren't turning to political solutions, but then that's the way I was brought up. You look to politics. Maybe there are other ways. Are there other ways, Nick?
Well, it has to be a political solution, and it's in our hands to do something about it. To organise.
Organise, yeah.
And to change the world.
Okie doke. Well, let's come and see the exhibition. It's what we're seeing at the museum. Stimulate the old brain cells.
Yeah. At least it's happened. I mean, it's probably the first time ever.
That in itself is
ever that they've had anything like this inside a public institution.
I've never seen anything like it before. No. Okay.